Hi. Page 30 of This Freedom Whence by John Wesley Bready, still in the chapter Blind Guides, about the contrast between the high clergy and that which was bubbling underneath, which would be called by us later the Evangelical Revival. This section is entitled Pride Precludes Fellowship. Nevertheless, before the death of George II, that is 1760, indeed by the middle of the century, new influences were astir, destined to baptize with spiritual power this unregenerate century. Even prior to 1750, such evangelical clergymen as Grimshaw, Hervey, Walker, Adam, and Romaine had caught the revival fire and were radiating its light, its fellowship, and its inspiration. Before the close of the 18th century, the evangelical zealots within the national church included a historic band of veterans of the cross, among whom were such varied and remarkable characters as the Venns, Berridge, Fletcher, Newton, the Milner brothers, Robinson, Cecil, Scott, and Simeon. And the service they rendered is typified in the life of the almost forgotten Thomas Jones. Driven at first from parish to parish because of his enthusiasm, at length, under Simeon's influence, he was given the curacy of the village of Cretan, that's in Northamptonshire, at £25 a year. In that unpromising hamlet of 46 houses, Jones labored without any preferment for 43 years, and never was he promoted beyond the rectorship of the said parish. Yet from that humble base, this despised zealot transformed the surrounding community and threw out influences which affected the nation. He was a founder of Sunday schools, dame schools, sick clubs, and clothing clubs. With the profits from his devotional books, published in English and Welsh, he built 6 almshouses for aged widows. Through the Cretan Clerical Education Society, which he founded, he enabled 50 evangelical laymen to enter the ministry. And during the first 18 years of his work, the Society for Poor Pious Clergymen, which also he created, distributed more than £35,000. While besides all this, he established a post-Easter spiritual retreat to which for prayer, Bible study, fellowship, and consultation, earnest clergymen from surrounding counties annually repaired. As for church laymen, who before the end of the century were torchbearers in the evangelical ranks, they include characters who will be remembered as long as English or indeed humanitarian history endures. Among them were William Wilberforce, the parliamentary and national leader of the crusade against the slave trade, and Zachary Macaulay, the governor of the famous colony of emancipated slaves at Sierra Leone. Among them, too, were Lord Teignmouth, who for 5 years was Governor-General of India, John and Henry Thornton, the philanthropic bankers, William Cowper, the leading poet of his age, Robert Raikes of Sunday school fame, Charles Grant, chairman of the East India Company, and not least Lord Dartmouth, colonial secretary, whose conversion was commemorated by Cowper in the memorable lines, "We boast some rich ones whom the gospel sways, and one who wears a coronet and praise." Bready goes on, among women who already had risen to high influence and rendered mighty service was that amazing and much maligned leader, Selina, Countess of Huntingdon, who without stint consecrated her time, fortune, and genius to the revival's work, whilst Hannah More, the most widely read literary woman of her century, both by her writings and her philanthropic achievements, was now exercising an influence accurately described as nationwide. Nor should it be forgotten that Hannah Ball's unobtrusive Sunday school labors preceded those of Raikes by 11 years. Before the close of the century, too, certain remarkable fruits of the revival were unmistakable. Nonconformity, turning from a frigid rationalism, was gradually assimilating power by contact with the movement it first had reviled. Everywhere it was manifesting new faith, vision, and vigor. Groups of Anglicans, moreover, clergymen and laymen, for the first time since 1662, were working harmoniously in a score of common causes with dissenters, as their brethren in Christ. Already the pioneer missionary societies of Protestantism had sprung up, and evangelical zealots were sacrificing to send their bearers of glad tidings to all quarters of the globe. Evangelical outsiders were now scouring the wilds of North America, bringing deep meaning to the pioneer's task in organizing scattered, lonely settlers into religious communities. Howard and other Christian zealots had modified the barbarities of the prison system and challenged the vicious penal code. The Sunday School movement, the Lancastrian School Society, and the Religious Tract Society were laying the rude foundations of popular education. Still more significant, the crusade destined to achieve the noblest triumph of modern history was now probing the soul of England as never had moral or social issue probed it before. And both the inspiration and the leadership of that crusade were born of the Evangelical Revival. The famous historian, Dr. J.H. Overton, a high churchman, writes, quote, "It was not only evangelicals, but evangelicalism that abolished the slave trade," unquote. The same was true of the later phase of this struggle, for finally the revival's influence killed the institution of slavery throughout the British Empire and emancipated all British slaves. Yet incredible as is the fact, to the end of the 18th century and for more than a decade into the 19th, the religious awakening that saved England had not a single representative on the episcopal bench. Among all popular fallacies, none is more rampant than the common delusion that the dawning years of the 19th century saw the national church in the control of evangelicals. The reason for this delusion is obvious. Evangelicalism, within and without the national church, represented the only virile, creative religion of the period. But a delusion it remains, for until the second decade of the 19th century, evangelicals as such were all but unrepresented in the higher councils of the church. When, in the belated year of Waterloo, that is 1815, they were represented by their first bishop, Dr. Ryder of Gloucester, he was the brother of a cabinet minister. Yet despite Ryder's ability, high character, and family influence, Archbishop Sutton, the blue-blooded primate who succeeded More, and like More died rich, flew into an uproar on the appointment and tried to prevent Ryder's installation, while the dean and chapter of Gloucester strove to exclude him from the cathedral pulpit, and crowds flocked to see this great curiosity, a religious bishop. The expulsion of 6 evangelical students from St. Edmund Hall in Oxford in 1768 for their religious zeal was but indicative of the attitude of the higher church officials to the revival. St. Mary Magdalene Church, the only evangelical centre at Oxford, was put out of bounds for all undergraduates. Trinity, Simeon's church at Cambridge, was long the scene of incredible persecutions. And until 1788, when Isaac Milner, a brilliant mathematician, was made president of Queen's College, Cambridge, evangelicals experienced great difficulty in finding either Oxford or Cambridge colleges which would so much as admit their candidates for holy orders. Even at the close of the century, evangelicals in Greater London were excluded from all but 3 livings. And were it not for the numerous proprietary chapels built by consecrated laymen, for the many lectureships to which, despite the bishops, parishioners could elect clergymen, and for various evangelical trust funds raised to purchase spheres of work while ecclesiastical dignitaries piled up pluralities, the professional Judaizers might have succeeded in freezing the revival heralds out of the national church. Well, this is almost unbelievable. Next time, Bready concludes this chapter on blind guides with the victory of evangelicalism, but it took a century from the time of John and Charles Wesley's childhood to the end of the Napoleonic era for the evangelical penetration to become irresistible in the Church of England. And when it did happen, however, it changed the face not just of England, but of Western society completely. But that's the rest of the book. So next time, William Romaine and other powerful evangelicals change the tide at the end of the 18th century.